When she opened her trunk, a locked journal and a silver locket fell out. The trunk still sits at the foot of our bed. I never moved it, not once all these years. She knows I haven't touched it, and she's never asked me to. That's the kind of understanding you build with a woman who's seen you at your worst and chose not to look away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The trunk is iron-strapped oak, painted black, and the paint has worn down to raw wood at the corners from how many times it's been loaded onto a wagon or a rail car or a mule. It has 2 brass latches that she keeps polished and a lock in the middle that she never locks anymore. It locked once, for a long time. That's part of this. When I first saw it fall open in the dust, and those 2 things came out, the journal and the locket, I knew that whatever kind of day I'd been having, it had just changed into something else entirely. I just didn't know yet which kind of something else. Let me tell you how I got there and how she got me back. My name is Gideon Cord. I'll say that plainly because a man ought to own his name, even when he's spent years treating it as something to shed at territory lines. I was 43 years old in the fall of 1882, which meant I had been drifting for better than 2 decades. I'd scouted for the Army, guided survey parties, tracked men for sheriffs who didn't have the stomach for it themselves, done 3 winters as a freighter out of Prescott. I'd had 1 wife early, and the marriage was short and ugly, and I won't go into that except to say it was my fault, and I knew it even then. After that, I didn't linger anywhere long enough to become a problem. Learned to read country the way other men read a book. Canyon walls, grass color, the angle of dust in the afternoon, I could move through land and leave almost nothing. I had enough by then, enough skill, enough sense. I had a dog, Lance, a big ugly shepherd who'd been with me 6 years and who could track a man across rock. I had a good rifle, a good horse, roan mare I called Tuesday because that's the day I won her in a card game. I didn't need much and I didn't ask for much. I also had a bullet in my left side that had been there 3 weeks, and I was dying from it. Not fast. Fast would have been easier. It was the slow kind, where the fever comes and goes and you tell yourself each morning it's better and each night you know it isn't. The ball was deep. A bushwhacker outside Seligman, a man I'd testified against 2 years before who'd gotten out of Yuma and decided to settle the account. He'd only winged me, which he'd have hated to know. But the angle was bad and the ball had gone where no knife I trusted could follow without killing me anyway. And I'd been moving because moving seemed like the answer. It wasn't the answer. By the time I came off the mesa above the Carrizo Creek Basin and saw the ranch below me, I was having trouble staying on Tuesday. Not swaying. I hadn't got to swaying yet, but I was working to stay straight, and the work was showing. Lance ran ahead, which he didn't normally do, and I took that as the opinion of a dog who'd watched me worsen for 3 weeks and was ready for things to change. The ranch was small. A main house adobe with a timber porch that needed 1 post replaced. A barn that was tight and well-built, better built than the house, which told you something about whoever ran the place. Corrals with 8 or 9 horses, good stock, not fancy but sound. A kitchen garden on the south side with some late-season squash that had survived the first frost under cut feed sacks. Wood stacked along the east wall, enough for a full winter. Someone here knew what they were doing. That much I could see from the mesa. What I couldn't see was who. I came down the switchback slow, not because I was being careful, but because Tuesday had learned to read me, and she was being careful on my behalf. By the time I reached the flat and crossed toward the ranch yard, there was a woman standing on the porch with a rifle. She didn't point it at me. That was the first thing I noticed. She held it correctly, stock up, barrel down, both hands on it, but she didn't raise it. She watched me come across the yard the way you watch weather, trying to read it, not yet decided what it meant. I stopped Tuesday 30 feet out, standard distance. Close enough to talk, far enough that a spooked horse doesn't put you in each other's way. "Afternoon," I said. "Afternoon," she said back. She was a few years younger than me, maybe late 30s, though she had the kind of face that sun and work age differently than time does. Dark hair, pulled back hard. Steady eyes, gray or green, I couldn't tell from 30 feet. She wore a canvas coat over a work dress and her boots were practical. Everything about her was practical. Lance sat down at Tuesday's feet and looked at her. Lance didn't sit for strangers. I noted that. "I've got a situation," I said. "I can see that," she said. "How bad?" "Manageable," I said. I'd been saying that for 3 weeks. I was past believing it myself. She looked at me the way you look at a man who's lying to your face about something you can plainly see. Your shirt's wet on the left side and it's not raining, she said. Come down. Her name was Ruth Casper, widowed 3 years. Her husband Daniel had been a horse rancher with good sense and bad luck, and he'd died of a fever that moved fast and didn't give her much warning. She had a hand, an old Mexican named Esteban who'd been there since Daniel bought the place, and she had a boy, her nephew Caleb, 14, who'd come to live with her after his father, Daniel's brother, had been killed in a mining accident up in the territory. Esteban was somewhere on the upper pasture. Caleb was at the barn, and he came out to take Tuesday when I dismounted. I didn't exactly dismount. I got down in a way that left more of the work to the horse and the fence post than I would have liked. The boy caught my arm without being asked, which told me his aunt had trained him right, and he didn't say anything about it, which told me she'd raised him right on top of that. Barn or house? Ruth asked. House is fine, I said, if that's all right. She gave me a look that said she hadn't asked if it was fine, she'd asked where I wanted the trouble. House, she said, and she held the door. She got the shirt off me in the kitchen. She had a composure about it that wasn't coldness. She wasn't cold. It was more like she'd seen harder things than this, and she'd made her peace with not looking away from hard things. She cleaned the wound with carbolic she kept in a bottle in the kitchen cabinet. Not in a medical kit, but in the kitchen cabinet, which meant she used it regularly. And she packed it, and she didn't say anything while she worked. When she was done, she washed her hands at the basin and dried them, and then she said, How long? 3 weeks. The ball's still in. I know. She looked at me. I can't get it. I don't have the tools for that depth, and I'd kill you trying. I know that, too. Town doctor is 40 miles. I figured. She folded the towel and set it on the counter. Outside, I could hear Caleb talking to Lance in the yard, the dog's short answering bark. Then we manage it and hope it walls off, she said. That can happen. I know it can. It can also not happen. I know that too, I said. She looked at me for a moment, not with pity, not with that particular kind of fear people get when they don't know how to be around a man who might be dying. She looked at me the way you look at a situation you've decided to handle. Then we manage it, she said, and she went to start supper. I have thought over the years about what it was that made me stay. I told myself at first it was practical, too far gone to ride, dangerous to move, sensible to let the wound either close or declare. And all of that was true, but I'd pushed through practical limits before. I'd ridden on worse than good sense allowed. There was something else at work in that kitchen. In the plain way she'd said then, we manage it. And I didn't examine it too closely because I wasn't a man who examined things too closely. I just knew I wasn't getting back on Tuesday. I slept in the room off the kitchen for 3 days. The fever spiked the second night and she sat up, changing the cloth on my forehead, which I know because I half woke and saw her there in the lamplight with the same composure she brought to everything. And then I went back under. When I fully came back, it was morning and she was making coffee, and Lance was lying outside the door with his chin on the threshold watching me, which was how he always waited when he thought I needed watching. Bad night, I said. You held, she said. She poured a cup and brought it to me. Esteban thinks the ball may have gone into muscle and stopped short of anything vital. He's seen it before. Esteban, a doctor. He worked cattle surgery for 20 years. It's not the same. But he knows what killing looks like, and he said you don't look killed. I drank the coffee. It was strong and it was good. High praise, I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more careful than a smile. He doesn't give it often, she said. I was there a week before I was useful and 2 weeks before I was myself. In between, I was something in the middle, ambulatory, able to eat and carry light things and sit on the porch in the evening, but not yet whole. It's a strange interval, that. Not sick enough to be forgiven everything, not well enough to be equal. I tried to pay it down in small ways. I sharpened tools, I mended tack. I helped Caleb with the arithmetic he was supposed to be doing from a school book Ruth had ordered from somewhere east. The boy was smart and bored and needed to be shown why the arithmetic mattered. So I talked to him about survey work and measuring land and the way a man who couldn't cipher got cheated, and after that he took more interest. Ruth watched me with Caleb without saying anything about it. On the 12th day, Esteban said he thought the wound was granulating cleanly. Not sure yet, but the signs were right. I told Ruth that evening and she nodded. You'll want to be moving, she said. I was thinking about it, I said, which was true. I was thinking about it the way you think about something you're not sure you actually want. She was quiet a moment. We were on the porch. The last light was going off the mesa to the west, turning it the color of a coal gone cool. The post needs replacing, she said. She meant the porch post, the one I'd noticed coming in. And the barn's north wall has a log that's starting to go. Winter'll get in through it if it's not chinked. I looked at the post. I looked at the mesa. I could look at those, I said. All right, she said, and that was that. I want to tell you about the trunk now, because it comes into this a particular way, and I want you to understand what it was before you hear what happened with it. It was her trunk. Her personal trunk, the one she'd brought from her parents' house when she married Daniel Casper, and before that her mother had brought it from Ohio, and before that her grandmother had brought it from Pennsylvania on a wagon that took 6 months and buried 2 of the family along the way. It was a trunk with history in it, is what I'm saying. She kept it in her room, and it held what it held, and that was her business. I'd been at the ranch nearly 3 weeks when the trunk became my business, and it wasn't my intention. I was in the barn working on the north wall when I heard it happen, a sound from the yard, the particular heavy thud of something solid hitting packed dirt, followed by a shorter sound, almost musical, like a bell struck once. I came around the corner of the barn and Caleb was standing in the yard looking stricken, and Ruth's trunk was on the ground with both brass latches sprung, and next to it on the dirt were 2 things. A leather-bound journal, brown, the cover dark with age and handling, with a lock on it that I could see even from where I stood. And a silver locket on a chain, the chain coiled like it had been resting. Caleb looked at me. I was only trying to help her carry it to the wagon, he said. She needed it in the wagon, I dropped it. Ruth came out of the house and she saw the trunk and she went still. She walked to it, not fast, not the way you run to something broken, just walked to it, and she crouched and she picked up the locket first and put it in her coat pocket. Then she picked up the journal and held it against her chest, both arms around it. She looked at Caleb. I know, he said, miserable. I'm sorry. It's all right, she said, and the way she said it, I believed her. She wasn't angry at the boy. But her face was the face of someone who just had something private made public, even if only to the 2 of us, and she was collecting herself the way a person does when a room they've kept locked gets a window broken in it. I went and picked up the trunk and latched it and carried it to the wagon and set it in. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. After a moment, she put the journal back in the trunk and she closed it, and she climbed up to the wagon seat and went wherever she was going. I stood in the yard with Caleb, and we both knew we'd seen something we weren't supposed to see. What's in the journal? He asked. None of our business, I said. She was back by dark. She put the wagon up herself, which she always did, and she made supper, which was beans and salt pork and cornbread, same as 3 nights before, and she didn't mention the trunk. Neither did I. Caleb had clearly decided on silence, which was the right decision for a 14-year-old, and honestly the right decision for all of us. After supper, I sat on the porch, and she came out after a while, and she stood at the rail and looked out at the dark. The journal's Daniel's, she said. I waited. He kept one his whole life. I never read it when he was alive. I thought it wasn't right. A man's private thoughts are his own, she paused. After he died, I could have, but I didn't for a long time. And then you did, I said. And then I did. She was quiet a moment. Some of it was hard, some of it was more than I expected, some of it was just a man writing about a fence he needed to fix or a horse he was worried about. A pause. Some of it was about me, the things he didn't say to my face. Men don't always say the things, do they? No, I said, they don't. He thought I was brave, she said. He never told me. I would have liked to have heard it. She said it without resentment, or at least without much of it, just a plain fact she was naming. I've read it twice now. I carry it with me because I don't want to leave it behind when I go to town, which doesn't make sense, but there it is. Makes sense to me, I said. She looked at me. Does it? Man writes something down, it's still him saying it. Feels different to leave it somewhere than to take it with you. She was quiet for a moment. The locket was his mother's. He gave it to me before we married. There's a photograph of him inside that I've never taken out because I don't want to have it out and then have to put it back. I understood that. I understood it the way you understand something that touches something old in you. Seems like a good man, I said. He was, she said, not perfect, but a good man, yes. We were quiet after that for a while. The coyotes were going somewhere off to the north. Lance raised his head and listened and then put it back down. I'll have that north wall done by day after tomorrow, I said. All right, she said. She went inside. I stayed on the porch a little longer and looked at the stars. I finished the north wall. I fixed the post. I rebuilt a section of the corral gate that had been giving Esteban trouble, and I dug out a clogged drainage ditch along the south side of the kitchen garden so the next snowmelt wouldn't come in through the floor. I made no announcement about any of this. I just saw what needed doing and did it. It was the kind of work I understood, not complicated, not requiring discussion. See the problem, address the problem. There was satisfaction in it that I'd mostly lost track of in the years of moving around, and I wasn't ready to examine why being useful on this particular piece of ground felt different from being useful for hire. Ruth saw what I was doing. She didn't comment on it directly. But one morning she had coffee waiting when I came in from the early chores, which she hadn't done before, and she'd made biscuits, and she set them in front of me without a word and went back to whatever she was doing. I understood that. It was her way of saying she saw it. On a Thursday, a real Thursday, not a horse, she asked me at supper whether I'd ever done proper carpentry. Some, I said. The house wants a second room, she said. Caleb's been in the root cellar all winter, and it's no place for a growing boy. Daniel had plans drawn. The lumber's mostly here, been sitting in the barn since before he died. I looked at her. That's a week's work at least, I said. I know it, she said. I looked at my plate, then I looked up. I'll look at the plans, I said. I'll tell you something about building a room onto a house. It requires a particular kind of presence. You can't do it halfway and you can't do it half thinking about somewhere else. You have to commit to the square footage, the grade of the floor, the way the weight bears. You have to think about where someone is going to live, and that means you start, without meaning to, thinking about that person living there. I thought about Caleb, where his bed would go. Whether there was enough height in the eave for him to stand in a few years when he grew into himself. Whether the window should face east for morning light, because boys need to wake up and go. I put the window east. Ruth came to look at the framing one evening, standing in the unfinished room in the early dark with a lamp. He'll like the east window, she said. Boys ought to have morning, I said. She looked at me a long moment, then she looked back at the framing. Daniel would have put it north, she said. He liked north light for practical reasons. He didn't think about boys needing morning. He was a practical man. He was, another pause. You think about different things than he did. I didn't know what to say to that. I picked up a board and set it to check the length. That's not a criticism, she said. I didn't take it as one, I said. She went back to the house. I worked until I couldn't see. I was at the ranch 6 weeks when I knew I wasn't going to leave. I didn't say it. I didn't announce it or make any kind of declaration. I just knew. The way you know the weather has changed because the air is different before a single cloud shows. Something had shifted inside me in a way I didn't have the vocabulary for, and I'd been a man of few words long enough to know that the right response to something you can't name is to wait and let it name itself. I also knew, because I wasn't a fool, and because I'd been watching her for 6 weeks, that Ruth Casper was not a woman you moved fast with. She was careful in all the ways that mattered. She'd been through a grief that had cost her something real, and she'd built herself back up into this ranch, this life, this particular composure. And she wasn't going to let anyone walk in and shift it without good reason. I had to be good reason. I didn't know yet if I was. The test came on a Saturday in November. I'd ridden to Esteban's place. He had a small house at the edge of the property, had lived there 20 years, to help him with a roof repair before the next snow. We worked most of the day, and I came back in the late afternoon, and there were 2 horses in the yard I didn't know. Ruth was on the porch. She wasn't holding her rifle, but she was standing with her hands at her sides in a way that said she'd thought about getting it. The 2 men were in the yard. One was broad, maybe 50, with a cattleman's hat and the look of a man who was used to people agreeing with him. The other was younger, maybe 30, standing just behind the first in the way a man stands when he's there for backing and not for talking. I rode Tuesday to the rail and got down and came to the porch without being asked. Cord, Ruth said. The way she said it was simple, clean, just my name, but it said something. "Afternoon," I said to the men. The broad man looked me over. "Didn't know she had a hand," he said. "I'm not a hand," I said. He looked at me a little differently then. "Myron Latch," he said. "I ranch the eastern portion of this valley. I've been having a conversation with Mrs. Casper about her water rights on the Carrizo branch." "That conversation go somewhere?" I asked. "It's still going," he said, and he smiled in the way that men smile when they think they hold all the cards. "Mrs. Casper's been under a lot of strain since Daniel passed, running this place alone. I thought it might be time to talk about some arrangements that would ease her burden." Ruth didn't move behind me. I could feel her there the way you feel weather coming. "What kind of arrangements?" I said. "Legal ones," Latch said. "She transfers the Carrizo rights to my trust, I give her fair market price, and I provide her a guarantee of water access through the winter. It's a good arrangement. Everybody wins." "Mrs. Casper loses her water rights," I said. "She loses the conflict over them," he said. "There's a difference." I looked at him for a moment. "There isn't," I said. "Not really." He dropped the smile. "Who are you exactly?" "My name's Gideon Cord. I'm not a hand." That hung there. He was deciding what to make of me. I let him decide. "Cord," he said. "I've heard that name." "Could be," I said. He studied me another moment, then he looked past me at Ruth. "We'll finish this conversation when the time is better," he said. "The time's fine," Ruth said from behind me, and her voice was steady. "Mr. Cord has said what I've been trying to say. There's no arrangement to be had. Good afternoon, Mr. Latch." Latch looked at me. I held it. He had some nerve, but he wasn't stupid, and he could read a situation. He touched his hat to Ruth, not to me, and he and the younger man got on their horses and rode out. I listened to them go. When the sound was done, I turned around. Ruth was looking at me. She wasn't flushed or shaken, but something had moved across her face, something she was working to make neutral again, and I caught it before it was gone. "He's been coming around," she said. "I know he has," I said. I'd seen the tracks twice along the north fence. "Daniel's been gone 3 years, and the offer gets a little different each time, and a little more like something I don't have a choice in." She paused. "I do have a choice, but it gets tiring making it." "It won't need making again," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You can't promise that," she said. "I can manage it," I said. The corner of her mouth moved, the same small movement I'd seen the morning after the fever. Only this time it went a little further. "That's what I said about you," she said, 3 weeks ago. Latch came back twice. The first time I was in the yard and we spoke for about 2 minutes and he left. The second time was in December and he brought 3 men, and that was the only time it was anything but talk. One of the men made a calculation about me that was wrong, and I corrected it, and after that Latch took his crew home and sent a lawyer's letter instead. I wrote back, through the county office in Flagstaff, through proper channels, and that was the end of Myron Latch. I'm not telling you I'm a violent man. I'm also not telling you I'm not. What I am is a man who can read when a thing is going to require a hard answer and who doesn't hesitate when the time comes. That's a quality that's more useful than most people want to admit and less glamorous than stories make it sound. I did what needed doing. The water rights stayed with the ranch. Ruth kept her life intact. She never asked me for the details. She knew there were details. She just looked at me one evening a few days after the last visit and said, "Thank you." Not elaborated on, not made into a speech, just thank you. "It's your land," I said, "your water." "Yes," she said, "it is." Something settled between us in that moment that I don't know how to describe better than that. Settled. Like the way ground settles after rain soaks in. Winter came on hard in early December. 3 days of wind off the high plateau, then snow that came in sideways and piled against the north wall of the house I'd built to take it. Caleb's room held. The window faced east and the morning light came in at an angle across his bunk, and I saw him. One morning I was up early, lying in it with his eyes open, just looking at the light on the ceiling, and there was something peaceful about his face that I thought had probably been a long time coming for that boy. I made the coffee that morning. Ruth came out and found it waiting. She stood at the counter with her cup and looked out the window at the snow, and she was quiet for a while. Then she said, without turning, "What did you do before all this?" I told her. The scouting, the guiding, the years of moving. I told her more than I usually told anyone, because she was the kind of woman who listened to the whole of a thing before she responded, and that's rare enough that you don't waste it. When I was done, she was quiet a moment. "Did you like it?" she said. I thought about that. "I was good at it," I said. "That's not the same thing." She turned and looked at me. "No," she said, "it isn't." "I like this better," I said, and then I heard what I'd said and I didn't take it back. She looked at me for what felt like a long time but was probably only a few seconds. Then she looked back out the window. "The south fence is going to need work in the spring," she said. "I figured," I said. "Esteban can't do it alone." "I know that." She drank her coffee. I drank mine. Outside, the snow came down in the way it does in high desert, straight down, when the wind dies, almost lazy, like it's got nowhere particular to be. "All right then," she said, and that was that. I want to stop here and tell you what all right then meant, because a man can spend a lifetime watching women say things and miss what the words are actually carrying. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't a woman giving a man a task to do. It was an answer to a question neither of us had asked in plain language. But that had been living in the air between us since about the second week, since she'd sat up by the lamp in the fever night, and since I'd fixed the post, and since the trunk had fallen open in the yard, and she'd told me about Daniel's journal and what it meant to carry it. She was telling me I could stay. More than that, she was telling me she wanted me to. She didn't make it simple for me to get wrong. She put it in practical language, which was the language she trusted, which was the language I trusted too, and we both knew what it meant. That's the thing about two people who have been through enough of life to be done with ornament. You say the real thing in the plain words, and the other person hears it for what it is. I heard it. I set my cup down and I went and got my coat and I went out to the barn to start the morning work. And I'm not going to call it happy. That's not quite the word. I was something that had been folded up for a long time and was just now, slow and careful as a man with a wound, starting to open out. Spring came. The south fence got done. Esteban and I worked it together, and he taught me some things about how the cattle moved, and I taught him some things about reading ground. And by the end of it, we understood each other in the way two men understand each other when they've worked a long week, and neither of them wastes words. In April, Caleb turned 15, and Ruth made him a cake with sugar she'd been saving, and I gave him a sheath knife I'd been working on in the evenings, the handle carved from antler, his initials stamped into the leather. He looked at it for a while, and then he looked at me and he said, "Is this something you know how to make, or did you figure it out?" "Figured it out," I said. He nodded like that was the better answer, like figuring it out counted for something. Ruth saw the exchange. She was cutting the cake, and she didn't look up, but something around her eyes changed in a way I'd learned to read. That night, after Caleb was in his room and the lamp was low, she and I sat at the kitchen table with what was left of the cake, and she said, "He didn't have a man in his life." "Not for a while." "I know," I said. "He's watching you, how you are, what you do." She paused. "He's putting together some idea of what a man is supposed to be." I thought about that. That put some weight on me, I said. "Yes," she said, "it does." And she held my eyes steady, not accusing, not demanding, just holding them, letting me know what was at stake without telling me what to do about it. "He's watching you," she said again, quietly, "and you're doing fine." I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. But I think she knew from the way I sat there that I understood what she'd said and what she meant by it. After a while, she put her hand on the table between us. "Just put it there. Open, palm down." I put mine over it. We sat like that a while without speaking. Outside, a barn owl went over, and I heard Caleb's breath in his room even out and go slow, and the fire cracked once, and the night was full of the kind of quiet that means safety. In May, I asked her to marry me. I want to tell you it was a fine speech, something a man might write down and be proud of. It wasn't. I'm not a man made for fine speeches. What I said was approximately this, that I didn't have much, a horse and a dog and some skills and a willingness to work until there wasn't work left, that I hadn't always been a good man but I was trying to be now, and that if she'd have me I'd be here until I wasn't able to be any more and then some. She looked at me across the kitchen table. "That's it," she said. "That's most of it," I said. She was quiet for what felt long enough that I understood the possibility she was going to say no, and I made myself sit with that and not fill the silence. "Daniel proposed to me with a whole speech," she said. Memorized it, I think. It was a good speech. She paused. This is better. It's shorter, I said. It's honest, she said. I'd rather have honest. She said yes. She said it plain, just that word, and I exhaled something that had probably been in my chest since Seligman. We were married in June in the county seat, just us and Esteban and Caleb, and a woman from the general store in town who'd been kind to Ruth and who cried at it, which surprised me. The ceremony was short. The judge was a practical man about it, which I appreciated. On the way back to the ranch in the wagon, Caleb sat between us on the bench. There was room on either side. He didn't have to, and he fell asleep with his head against my arm somewhere in the last 5 miles. And Ruth looked over at me, and there was something in her face that I won't try to put into words because I don't have words big enough. I'll just say that she looked at me as if I was exactly where she'd expected me to end up and was glad I'd made it. I held the reins with a hand that wasn't taken up by a sleeping boy, and I thought about Seligman, and about Tuesday bringing me off the mesa slow, and about the trunk falling open in the yard. Here's what I know about that trunk now, 22 years on. She still keeps it at the foot of the bed. Daniel's journal is still in it, and the locket with his photograph. She reads the journal sometimes, not often. She told me once that she thought Daniel would have liked me, which I took as a considerable thing coming from her, and I told her I thought he must have been a good man to have built what she'd built with him, and she smiled the way she smiles when something lands right. The trunk is not a problem. It was never a problem. What it is the record of a life she had before me, a good life with a good man, and she carries it the way you carry something you earned and don't intend to set down. I would not want her to. A woman who honors the things she loved before you is a woman who knows what love is, and that's not something to be afraid of. That's something to be grateful for. She told me once, one evening on the porch, that when she decided to let me stay that first winter, the all right then at the kitchen counter, it was because of 3 things. She said, the way I was with Caleb, the way I handled Latch, and the way I'd said about the journal, a man writes something down, it's still him saying it. That told me something about you, she said. What did it tell you? I said. That you understood what it costs a person to love something and lose it, she said, and that you weren't going to treat my losses as inconveniences. I thought about that. I had some of my own, I said. I know, she said. That's the other thing. You weren't trying to come in here without any history. You weren't pretending to be something unbroken. I've had enough of men who pretend. She paused. You were exactly as broken as you were, and you didn't apologize for it. I didn't know what to say to that. I don't know now. I just know that she saw me, the real version, the worn-out drifter with a bad wound and 20 years of moving and not much to show for them, and she decided that was enough to work with. More than enough. That's not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all. She chose me on the evidence, not on promises, on what she could actually see. That's the kind of woman she is, and that's the kind of man she made me want to be. Tuesday died in 1887, a good old age for a horse, out in the east pasture on a morning in early spring. I found her there. I sat with her a while. Lance had been gone 2 years by then, and I sat with Tuesday the same way I'd sat with him. No ceremony, just company, the way you owe an animal that's given you years. Ruth came out after a while. She'd seen me from the house. She came and stood beside me and put her hand on my shoulder, and she didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. We stood there together in the early spring sun, and the pasture smelled like cold mud and new grass, and after a while she squeezed my shoulder once and went back to the house. I stayed a little longer. Caleb is 36 now. He ranches his own place up the valley, married well, has 4 children. He comes on Sundays mostly. He still calls me by my name, which I respect. I never asked him not to, and he never offered to, and that's an honest arrangement that suits both of us. But the way he says it is not the way he'd say the name of anyone else. Last fall he came over to help me with a roof repair, different roof, different years. And when we were done, we sat on the porch and he said, unprompted, I've been thinking about showing Thomas the knife. Thomas is his oldest, 11 now. He old enough, I said. Probably not, Caleb said, but you gave it to me when I probably wasn't old enough either. I thought about that. The handle held, I said. The handle held, he agreed. He looked out at the valley. I'm going to tell him you made it. Made you tell him that? I said. He smiled. He has his aunt's smile, the careful one, the one that means more than it shows. I'm in my 60s now, which should be impossible but apparently isn't. The wound from Seligman left a stiffness in my left side that gets worse in cold weather, and which I have learned to simply ignore as the price of being alive. The scouting work has been over for years. I'm a rancher now, which is what you become when you stop moving, and the land you stopped on is worth staying for. Ruth is out in the kitchen garden this morning, cutting the last of the summer herbs before the cold takes them. I can see her from the porch. She moves the way she always has, practical, focused, no wasted effort. Her hair is silver now, and she wears it pulled back the same way she did when I came across the yard on a dying horse 22 years ago. She knows I'm watching. She doesn't turn around, but there's a small shift in the set of her shoulders that tells me she knows. That's the whole of it, really, that small shift. The fact that after 22 years she still knows when I'm looking at her, and she lets me know she knows, and that's the language we speak. You build that or you don't. You can't manufacture it. You can't perform it. You just have to show up and be the man you actually are and trust that if the right woman is there, she'll see what's worth seeing. Ruth saw it. I was broken and feverish and out of road, and she looked at me and she decided that what I had left was enough to work with, and she pulled me back from the place I was headed, and she gave me this: the ranch, the garden, the porch, the south fence, and the east window, and the 22 years, and the Sunday visits from Caleb's family, and the trunk at the foot of the bed that I don't touch and don't need to touch. She saved my life. I don't mean the wound. I mean the other kind of saving, the kind that's harder and longer and doesn't have a single moment you can point to, but that happens over time, day by day, the same way ground warms up in April. The trunk will stay where it is. The journal's in it, the locket. Whatever else she keeps in there that I've never asked about and never will. That's her ground, and I don't walk it uninvited. A man who can't leave a woman her privacy doesn't deserve to share her life, and I want to deserve it. She comes in from the garden in a minute. I can see her wrapping the herb bundles, tying them off at the stem. In a little while she'll come up the porch steps and she'll see me here, and she'll say something practical about lunch or the weather or whether I remembered to check the east gate latch. And it'll be ordinary language that means something else underneath it, the way it always is with us. And I'll answer, and that'll be the whole of it. A man who got broken the right way, at the right time, on the right road to the right place. I was finished or close enough to it, and she stayed and she pulled, and she decided I was worth pulling. I'll spend whatever time I've got left trying to prove her right.